My phone buzzed with a call from my mom. I hit ignore, my jaw tight as I straightened the lapels of my dark gray suit in the reflection of a framed award. It buzzed again, but this time it was my boss. The text was simple. Priya, my office, now. I was already rehearsing my talking points for the Nutri-Active campaign lead, pacing the white floor of my apartment where the only color came from the city lights outside my window. The promotion was a logical certainty based on performance metrics, a necessary step on the path to senior vice president. My words were precise, my data was irrefutable, and my entire life was optimized for this exact moment. Another buzz came from my phone, my mom again, and I turned the screen over on the polished gray table without looking at it. Security was not something my parents understood. They thought it was in a good marriage, in settling down, but I knew it was in a corner office and a title that no one could take away from you. The office was bright, a large open space full of glass walls and motivational words. Kombucha was on tap in the kitchen, but the real currency was displayed on the desks. Toby Burton's workspace was covered in photos of his wife and new baby. He was laughing with our boss, Susan Robertson, near the coffee machine, talking loudly about his son's first soccer game, and she smiled warmly at him. My own desk was clean, except for work papers and a single powerful laptop. My coworker Jenna rolled her eyes from across the aisle. "That's how you win here," she whispered, not looking up from her screen. I spent the evening refining a market projection, ignoring 2 more calls from my parents. Their voices were a familiar weight, a constant reminder of the life they expected for me, a life I had systematically rejected for this one. Through the large window behind my desk, I saw my mailman finish his route on the street below. He was a tall man with a strong body, and he walked with a calm, unhurried pace. He pulled out his own phone, looked at it, then put it back in his pocket without answering. I felt a flicker of something like recognition before I turned back to my numbers. A cold dread was starting to seep into my focus, a feeling that all my hard work might not be enough. Susan called me into her office, the door closing with a quiet click. She was pleasant, her neat blonde hair perfect, her expensive dress simple and commanding. "Toby has been given the lead on Nutri-Active," she said, her hands folded on her large desk. A picture of her own family stood next to her monitor. I felt the floor drop away but kept my expression neutral. I asked for feedback, for areas of improvement, for data I could use to correct my trajectory. Susan gave me a patient smile. "Toby has deep roots in the community," she said. "He's demonstrated incredible long-term commitment." The subtext was clear. My singular focus was not an asset but a liability. My life, empty of personal attachments, was a risk. I walked back to my desk in a daze and saw an internal memo on my screen. SVP, candidate slate to be finalized EOD Friday. I had less than a week. The illusion of a meritocracy had shattered completely. That night, my apartment felt less like a minimalist sanctuary and more like a cold, empty box. I scrolled through dating apps on my phone, dismissing them immediately. They were chaotic, unpredictable, full of messy human variables I could not control. My ambition required a solution, not a distraction. My gaze fell on the stack of mail on my table. Ben had delivered it earlier, and on top was a foreclosure notice for an old defunct bookshop on the coast. I had seen him looking at that listing in the junk mail before, a quiet longing on his kind face. An audacious plan clicked into place, a strategic alliance with a clear, mutually beneficial objective. This was not a personal problem, it was a business problem, and it required a business solution. I grabbed my laptop and ran out the door. I saw him down the block, locking up his mail truck. "Wait! Stop!" I shouted, sprinting down the pavement in my heels. He turned, his expression shifting from tired to surprised. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened my laptop on the hood of a parked car and pulled up a PowerPoint deck I had created in the elevator. The title slide read, "A Mutually Beneficial Strategic Alliance." I explained that I would not offer him money because that would create the wrong dynamic. Instead, I would offer him my expertise. I would be his pro bono business consultant. I would provide market analysis, draft loan applications, and create investor pitches to help him secure and launch the coastal bookshop he so clearly wanted. In return, he would act as my loving, long-term boyfriend for all work-related functions until the SVP promotion was announced. He stared at the screen, then at me, and I saw a flicker of insult in his eyes that was quickly replaced by calculation. He knew this was his only real chance to act on his dream, to overcome whatever fear had kept him on this simple, predictable route. He closed the laptop and extended his hand. Deal. I shook it, a sharp, professional motion. As he turned to leave, he stopped and looked back at me, a wry smile playing on his lips. One more thing, he said. If I'm your long-term boyfriend, I'm cooking you dinner. My place. Friday. You need to know what you're getting into. The lie we were building was made of paper and ink, spread across the single table in my small room. Ben's plan for his book archive was next to my lists of acceptable topics for corporate conversation. One was about saving the past, and the other was about securing my future. And at night, under the sterile light, they did not seem so different. We worked while the city outside was quiet and dark, the way it always was after curfew. We invented a life together from nothing. We decided we met trading supplies at the Westgate Market, and that our first real date was sharing a can of peaches on the roof of his building. He learned that my parents used their entire life savings to buy my entry credentials into the NutriCorp candidate program, and that they died in a quarantine breach 2 years later. He learned that I see their faces every time I look at the high walls of the compound, and that failure feels like letting them die all over again. I learned that his family's bakery was a real community hub before the fall, a place people felt safe, and that the pressure to keep it that way became a weight he could no longer carry. One night, while inventing a story about a disastrous attempt to fix a water purifier, he laughed. It was a real sound, deep and honest, and it filled the empty space in my room. I looked at him, at the way his eyes creased at the corners, and the contract in my security locker felt like a document from another lifetime. The dinner at Susan's house was the first real test. Her home was inside the main compound walls, a place of impossible light and warmth. Guards with rifles stood at the corners of her property. Inside, the air was clean and a long table was covered with more food than I had seen in one place in a decade. Toby was there with his wife, and he watched us with a smile that never reached his eyes. He waited until the main course was served before he turned to Ben. So Ben, Priya tells us you're a courier. How did you two actually meet? It's hard to imagine her finding time for anything outside these walls. I felt my stomach tighten. Our rehearsed story felt thin and foolish in this bright room. Ben did not pause. He looked at Toby and then at me. I delivered a notice to her building about a new seed distribution program, he said, his voice calm and even. She was on her way to work. She looked tired. I told her she should sign up, that growing something green might do her some good. He reached over and put his hand over mine on the table. She told me she didn't have time for dirt. I kept the flyer for her anyway. I brought it back the next day. It was a beautiful lie, woven from details he knew. The perpetual exhaustion I carried, the small planter box I kept on my windowsill where nothing ever grew. It was so much better than the story we invented. Susan watched us, her expression unreadable. Toby's smile faded just a little. As we were leaving, Susan stopped me at the door while Ben was getting our coats. Priya, she said, her voice low. I was impressed tonight. We are holding the final evaluations at the Lakeside Lodge next weekend, a leadership retreat. It is mandatory for all candidates and their partners. I expect to see you and Ben there. The success of the lie felt like a cold stone in my chest. Walking back to my building, I was aware of Ben's presence beside me, a solid and comforting shape in the dark. For the first time, I felt a pull toward him that had nothing to do with our contract. It was a dangerous feeling, complicated by the high fence and armed guards of the test that was coming. The days before the retreat felt different. Our work sessions were less formal. The lie had a life of its own now, and we were just trying to keep up with it. He brought pastries from his family's bakery one night, a small bag of them. They were dense with real flour and sugar, a treasure in this world. He said we needed the energy to finish the loan application for his book archive. I found myself helping him refine the language, making his pitch for preserving knowledge sound less like a dream and more like a necessary investment in the future. Our fake relationship felt more real than my actual life. He looked up from a page of schematics for a secure ventilation system and caught my eye. "You know," he said softly, "for a fake girlfriend, you're pretty amazing." His sincerity hit me harder than any threat. I opened my mouth to say something, to make a joke or deflect, but my terminal buzzed on the table. It was a calendar notification. It read, "Lakeside, cabin check and shared. You and Ben Pousini." The words were stark and clinical. My goal, the position inside the walls, was now in a direct fight with the feeling growing inside me for the man I was paying to help me get it. The Lakeside Lodge was a collection of stark cabins surrounded by a high fence, with the dark, silent forest pressing in on all sides. It felt more like a prison camp than a retreat. Our first workshop was on achieving work-life balance. It was a series of tasks designed to test a partnership under pressure. We had to navigate a section of the woods with a map and a compass, then build a waterproof shelter before a simulated rainstorm. My focus was absolute, my movements efficient, my communication direct. I treated it like any other project, a set of variables to be controlled for a successful outcome. Toby and his wife moved with an easy, practiced rhythm, and he kept looking over at us, a small, knowing look on his face. The pressure started to build. Ben's approach was slower, more observant. He wanted to understand the environment, not just conquer it. Our friction came to a head during the shelter exercise. I insisted on a specific knot for the tarp, the one recommended in the NutriCorp survival manual. Ben argued for a different one he said would hold better if the wind picked up. "This is the official method, Ben. It's the one they are scoring us on." "It's not the best method, Priya. It's just the one in the book." The argument was quiet but sharp. It was not about knots. It was about control. It was about control. It was about control. It was about two different ways of seeing the world. Later, back in the suffocating silence of our shared cabin, the tension broke. "You have to stop managing me," he said, his back to me as he looked out the small window at the dark trees. "I am not another one of your projects." The accusation stung because it was true. "You don't understand what's at stake here," I said, my voice shaking with stress and anger. "This isn't a game. This is everything." "No, Priya, you're the one who doesn't get it." "No, Priya, you're the one who doesn't get it." He turned and walked out of the cabin, the door closing with a quiet click behind him. He left me alone in the sudden quiet. A moment later, I saw a figure walking up the path toward my door. It was Susan, coming for our scheduled one-on-one meeting. She came into the cabin and sat on the edge of the other cot, her posture perfect. She did not ask where Ben was. She asked me how I was handling the pressure. The lies I had rehearsed felt like ash in my mouth. All I could feel was the echoing emptiness of the room and the ache of Ben's absence. I looked at her, the powerful woman who held my future in her hands, and a piece of the truth came out. "It's hard," I whispered, the words raw and unplanned. "We come from different worlds. Sometimes I worry my ambition is too much for him, that what I need to do to survive in here will break the best parts of him." Susan's expression softened in a way I had never seen. She nodded slowly, a deep and ancient understanding in her eyes. I learned later that her own husband had left her years ago, unable to live with the choices she had to make to secure her position. My accidental, partial honesty was something she recognized. She saw a woman who understood the cost of a partnership in this world, and she believed that meant I was strong enough to last. The lie had worked, and it had worked because for a moment it had collapsed into a painful truth. When she left, telling me I was a very strong candidate, the victory felt like nothing at all. I had the thing I wanted, but the cabin had never felt so cold. Alone, I sat on my cot and opened my laptop. I pulled up the NutriCorp promotion criteria, a long list of metrics about loyalty and long-term stability. Then I switched screens to the finished business plan for Ben's book archive. One document was about rules and security. The other was about a fragile hope for a future I had forgotten how to imagine. I thought about the corner office I was so close to winning, a sterile room in a high tower. The thought of losing it stung, but the reality of the words I had said to Ben and the way he had looked at me before he walked out was a clean, deep cut. I closed the NutriCorp file. I opened a new, blank document. My fingers found the keys. I did not write a strategy memo or a follow-up email. I started to write an apology. I left the unwritten apology on the screen and walked out of the cabin into the cold air. The searchlights from the compound fence cut through the darkness over the trees, and I followed the dirt path down toward the water. He was standing on the shore of the gray lake, a dark shape against the flat, dead surface. I stopped a few feet behind him. "I used you," I said to his back. "I took your dream and I made it a line item in my career plan." He did not turn around for a long time. The only sound was the faint electronic whine from the perimeter fence. When he finally looked at me, his face was hard to read in the dim light. "Yes, you did." "I am sorry," I said, and the words felt small but real. Not for the fight, for the contract, for all of it. The person I was when I wrote that contract is not someone I want to be anymore. I took a step closer. What I said to Susan, about my ambition breaking the best parts of you, that was the first true thing I had said all weekend, and it terrified me. He watched my face, his own expression cautious. He had built walls to protect a quiet life, and I had paid him to let me knock them down. "What you said in the cabin," he said, "that this is everything. Is that still true?" I thought of the corner office, the security, the proof to my dead parents that their sacrifice was not for nothing. Then I thought of him laughing in my small room over a shared pastry. "No," I said, "it is not." He let out a long breath, and the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. He took a small step toward me. "My feelings are real, Ben," I whispered. "I know that was not part of the deal." He reached out and his hand found mine. His fingers were cold, but his grip was firm. Mine too. He looked back toward the path leading to the cabins. "Okay," he said, "so we're real. But the retreat isn't over. Toby is watching our every move, and we have one more presentation. What do we do now?" We stood there on the dead shore, a real couple for the first time, trying to figure out how to survive the last hours of the lie we had built together. A week later, I stood alone in the corner office. Susan had just left. The promotion was official. She had praised my performance at the retreat, my grounded perspective, my maturity. She said she knew I had what it took to make the hard choices for the long term. The office was vast, and the air was clean and filtered. Through the thick glass windows, the ruined city was a silent map of a world that no longer existed. This room was the safest place left, the prize I had worked my entire life for, and the victory felt like a deep and hollow ache. On the large desk sat a bottle of champagne, a relic from the old world, with a card from Susan that read, "Welcome to the family." My communicator buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the small screen. It was a message from Ben. He had sent a picture. It showed the inside of a small, damaged shop. Sunlight came through a hole in the roof, illuminating the air inside. Books were everywhere, covered in a thick layer of grime, their spines warped from neglect. Below the picture was a line of text. "Put in an offer. Terrified. Wish you were here." I looked at the picture of the chaotic, hopeful little bookshop. Then I looked at the sterile perfection of the corner office. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an answer. I left the unopened bottle of champagne on the desk. I sat at the new terminal and its screen glowed to life, connecting me to the closed NutriCorp network. I opened a new message and addressed it to Susan Robertson. I wrote that I was honored to accept a senior vice president position. I also wrote that my first act would be to propose a new division focused on sustainable career growth and employee wellness, using my own recent experience as a case study for the high cost of the company's current culture. I attached a second file to the message. It was my resignation, effective in 60 days. I wrote that I would only stay long enough to implement the groundwork for the new program. I hit send, leaving the decision in her hands. Then I closed the terminal and stood up. I pulled out my communicator and found his name. I pressed the button to call. He answered on the first ring. "Hey," I said, and a real smile spread across my face. "How would you feel about a business partner?" The heavy doors of the NutriCorp tower slid shut behind me. I walked across the empty plaza to the parking structure where the armored vehicle waited. Driving it away from the compound was a final decision that used a large amount of fuel with no chance of return. I steered the car down the ramp and out into the gray afternoon, leaving the gleaming tower behind me. I was not escaping a prison. I was graduating. I drove away from my sterile apartment and my old life, and I headed for the coast, toward a dusty bookshop and a shared, uncertain future that we would build ourselves.